What if you could advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, and add Harvard to your resume all at the same time? And what if you could do it all in just a few days? Keep your career moving forward in the right direction by earning a certificate from Harvard Professional Development in one of more than 80 programs. Designed to accommodate a busy professional schedule, our intensive programs offer meeting online or in person on Harvard's campus for 2 to 5 days. Search Harvard Professional Development to learn more.
Slow Burn Media, an evergreen podcast, presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
Fifth grader Amy Mihaljevic went to Bay Village Middle School on Friday wearing green pants, a lavender and green sweatshirt, and carrying a denim and red backpack. Police found Amy's bike locked up at school, but they haven't found Amy.
I've always taught them the rules. You never go with anyone anywhere, but that's how we got through her soft heart. She wanted to do something for Mom, and it was supposed to be kept a secret.
First of all, Margaret and Amy were close. They rode horses together, they hung out together, they were more close. And I think that there had to be some factual basis in Amy's mind for this trip to meet this person. And I think that would make sense. And I also think that for them to have the information they did implies some familiarity with Margaret.
It's what somebody's told me, that you'd have to know the area to be out there.
He could have been any age, really. I mean, we have a range of about 25 to 35, roughly, for this individual. Okay. Differing clothing descriptions, different hair descriptions, one with glasses, one without glasses. I think what we can safely say is that it's a white male, average build, who is probably in that 25 to 35 year age. That seemed to be fairly consistent. That's what we really can tell. Beyond that, it becomes very difficult to get into any kind of specifics as to who that person is or what they look like.
Yeah, the kids, and I think I remember the word, but if somebody said, "I'm here to pick up you at school," they, without them saying the secret word, they knew that was not, they weren't supposed to be doing that. It was brought up, yeah. That's what makes you think even more that she knew something about this person that she went off with. By then, Margaret had called all the Amy's parents' friends or friends, and called some of our friends that lived in. In fact, I was just out to lunch with this one guy that came in. He lived in Vermilion, came in from Vermilion, and that's when him and I walked the French Creek there all the way from Bay Village to the lakefront that night. And
Amy's posters up all over town will eventually come down. So will the ribbons tied up for Amy that are now worn and torn. But her memory will stay as this tiny tree grows. Students planted the tree for Amy after she disappeared.
The mystery of Amy Mihaljevic's murder began on October 27, 1989. The 10-year-old last seen at this Bay Village shopping plaza, lured there by a man she told friends had called her days before. He said he wanted to take Amy to buy her mom a gift since she'd just been promoted. And Amy could keep a better secret than her brother. She disappeared.
We love you, Amy. We love you. We support you. We send everything good out of our hearts to you. Send some message. Find some way to come home.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Who Killed, featuring Nic and the Captain of the True Crime Garage podcast. This week, we are going to be going back to an episode that we recorded a few years ago because of the fact that not much has really changed in the case of one Amy Mihaljevic. She was the 10-year-old girl who was kidnapped from the Bay Village shopping plaza on October 27th, 1989. Now, her body was found 50 miles away 109 days later, and her body had been there for pretty much the whole time. Unfortunately, we have only seen some minor updates throughout the years. I know that I've focused my original podcast on this case, and obviously this is one of those cases where it is very close to my heart. I grew up near where this happened, and again, it looms over the city as much as the authorities like to downplay that. But the case is still active and there are people working on it. But in that regard, there still really hasn't been anything new to report. There have been some false reports on News 5 where they claim to have received new evidence from a suspect that they found in the police transcripts or the police records, but it just turns out to be just a bunch of bunk because, well, have you seen any follow-up stories to that one? Well, I haven't, and I am pretty confident to say that something that was told to the police in 2019 should have been investigated by now. Therefore, that particular update, which they claimed was an exclusive, was really just a sweeps week special. And we all know how that works. And if you know me, you know I think that's a bunch of BS because, yes, it's important to cover these cases when anniversaries, such as the October 27th anniversary of Amy's abduction, to bring attention to the case. But is it to garner ratings for your news channel? I don't think so. I am not reporting anything new because I don't have anything new to report. But I am going to play this episode that I recorded with Nic and the Captain. Now, they are literally the pillars of the true crime community, and they probably have the best show in the country, in my opinion. Of course, I'm biased because they are my mentors and have helped me along the way. But again, these are cases that are very important to us. And Nic has worked with James Renner, and they've started the Porchlight Project, and they've provided funding for DNA testing, and they've had results, and it's great. And we are basically in a world where anything can happen. And if we just put enough effort towards it, we will eventually find an answer. We do know that they have DNA. We just also know that there isn't any test out there that will help us find the killer. So let's listen into this episode that I recorded with Nic and the Captain. I am lucky to have Nic and the Captain on this week's episode of Who Killed to discuss who killed Amy Mihaljevic. And welcome to the show, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I've never had the both of you on at the same time. It's quite a treat, and I hope the listeners will enjoy that as well, because I know you guys both have opinions on this case. Just give me a little background on each of your involvement with the case, because I know that to some degree it's a passion case of yours, but it's not, you didn't grow up in the Cleveland area, but age-wise, and, you've done a lot of episodes about it. So I just wanted to hear what you guys thought about the case, and having you both together, it's pretty nice.
Well, my involvement in the case probably stems from Nic's passion for it. I think it's a case that he's looked into several times. A lot of the cases we cover on the show, we have 7 days to dissect them as much as we can, and then we have to move on to the next case. With Amy's case, because there's so much information out there, it's a case that you can keep going back to over and over, and we've done that several times with our show. So I think my passion for the case comes from, it's something that he's interested in talking about. So anything that he brings to my attention, then I'm up late night Googling whatever he brought to my attention. So that's how I got involved in it.
Well, I followed the case for a few years, and it's it's led me to some interesting characters. Bill, you're one of them, and now a friend, and of course James Renner, who wrote the book Searching for Amy, My Hunt for Her Killer. It's an interesting case. We're all, the Captain, me, you, we're all about Amy's age. We're all from Ohio. We all can identify with that. I've told you before on this show, it was really, for me, it was a point in my life where a crime story that I saw on TV became something that was real. It wasn't just a story. It wasn't just happening to people that live far away in some place that I'd never been to. It wasn't a segment on Unsolved Mysteries. This was a person that was my age, that was, experiencing roughly the same things I was at the time, and lived a couple, an hour or two up the road from me, and it became very real. And I remember when they found her, and that made it even more real, because when she was missing, I was little at the time. You don't expect for the worst to happen, and it did. And it's a case that I followed for a very long time. And now here we are, as you pointed out, we are days away from the 31st anniversary of when she was abducted. And it's weird because the connections that I've made with people throughout the years looking into this case so much, they're all kind of reaching out to me again. Everybody's kind of talking again. It's on everyone's mind this time of year, of course.
I was going to say, it's also really interesting since we started the podcast. Before we started the podcast, Nic gives me a call one day and says, I'm going to this book reading of this author about this case. Happened to be James Renner. Cut to a year later, James is on the show. Then we end up having a relationship with James. Then you start your podcast. Then we have a relationship with you. And just this week, my buddy comes to visit hey, this girl that listens to your podcast, we struck up a conversation. We've been dating. We're now getting married. They come to my house, so I can meet her and everything. And then she explains to me that she's was a longtime friend of Amy Mihaljevic's. So it's just crazy how, even though it's 2 hours away, how connected we have become with a case like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It does sort of connect a lot of different, it comes up in a lot of different scenarios. A lot of, I'll be randomly out and talking about something, and somebody will come up to me and be like, "Oh, I heard you're the one that did the Amy Mihaljevic podcast. I went to school with her," or, it is something that I think as Ohioans, or just like the people in our generation, it's just something that is always going to be until it's solved, I think. And if it's solved, I think it's going to be one of those things that will constantly come up in conversation if we're discussing true crime or things that affected us as kids. Because like Nic said, it was the first time that a real crime affected the way that he looked at life. It was like, wait a second, this could actually come to my doorstep, and it's not just something that I see on TV or hear about. And I think that is probably, for me, I know that's probably the reason for me that it's resonated so long, and that it was just like somebody that could have easily been a part of my group of friends that was just, like, how do you know that somebody that is getting a phone call from a stranger? And what do you even say if you do know that? It's just, the whole situation, I think, is so unique. And I think that's what kind of traumatizes a little bit of everybody. And I know for me,
well, it's very a unique situation to have anybody in your elementary school pass away. And so to have a situation where this person obviously passed away, but it wasn't, that she ended up having cancer or something. This was somebody that was taken from this earth. So I think it's, especially the people that went to school with her or knew her in that community, how much that had to affect their childhood, probably even 10 times more than our childhood, just hearing about it from a distance.
Well, and
yeah,
stranger child abduction is, thank God, a very rare thing. But in 1989, you have Jacob Wetterling is abducted at gunpoint. Him and his buddies are on bikes coming from the video store.
That case is honestly, that was between your show and In the Dark. You guys were those were the driving forces behind doing a podcast about Amy Mihaljevic, because Wetterling was literally our age. And I mean, so was Amy, but right. We all rode bikes. We were guys. Come on, like if we were with two buddies, why wouldn't you think you'd be safe? And then 4 days later, whatever it was, Amy's abducted. And I think in the Redux episode that I'm doing tomorrow, or will have been last week, but basically that was a national story, where Amy's story was a national story, but it didn't
take off the way that Jacob's took off.
Yeah.
And I think the big part of that is, one, we have two witnesses, direct witnesses in his case, that say this is what happened. And the story itself of what happened is so terrifying. And then with Amy's, it doesn't even become really local news. I know that it hit the news that night because they're looking for her, but it didn't really become local news of an abduction until a couple days later. And that was with the story leaking out about, oh, I'm meeting an unknown man that's a family friend, in air quotes, that I don't know.
Mhm.
And I'm meeting them at this shopping plaza. And I think those two things, though, compounded together, are just very extreme for any community. And like you said, Jacob's case national, Amy's case quickly becomes a big regional story. And those two things together, I think, are going to be forever imprinted in people's minds that are of our age, people that are in their mid 30s to mid 40s. It was a big time. And Wetterling's case went unsolved for so many years. I mean, think about the story of his abduction. The three of them coming back from the video store. This vehicle pulls up. A lone man gets out with a gun. Two of these witnesses are going to go home, and they're going to tell their parents, we didn't get a good look at the guy, but what we did see, we do not know who this man is. And he tells them to lay down in the field, face down, so they can't get that good of a look at him. And he asked them their ages. How old are you? Each one of them has to shout out their age. He walks up to each one of them, picks them up, looks them in the face. Who knows what he's looking for? And he decides which of the three to take, like he's freaking grocery shopping. And he drives off with this kid, and we never see him again. And it's almost 30 years later to get some answers in that case. Amy's case, just as bizarre. But this was not a man with a gun with witnesses that saw and identified and knew right away what was going on. This was evil came in through the locked door of their home via the telephone and tricked this smart little girl into meeting him. And he just so casually walked away with her in front of everybody.
Yeah. I mean, and in that sense, do you feel like the killer is a local? I mean, if Wetterling's case, the guy, Danny Heinrich, who was eventually convicted of it, was basically a known pervert, but nobody really connected the dots between what he had done in a previous city. And basically he went like 30 minutes out of his way to go and kidnap Wetterling. With Amy's case, with the fact that she was found in Ashland, which is an hour from where she was last seen, and the familiarity with the locale of Bay Village, Nick, you mentioned he was like going grocery shopping by picking up the children and looking at them and asking them their ages. It's, if all the other phone calls are correct, like that they were actually connected to the same individual, in a sense, he was doing the same thing, but like you said, sneaking in through the people, with the telephone. And that's the way he was getting into the house, opposed to showing up with a gun and saying, "Come with me, kid, you two run in the woods." And I think, honestly, I do believe if Jacob's story did not happen, Amy's story would have gotten more coverage.
Right. And the weird thing about it, too, was in the minds of parents and in the minds of the people in the communities, immediately you go, well, this is such a rarity. They have to be somehow connected. And I was, there's an old newspaper article, I think it was from the Akron Beacon Journal, where they're straight up local law enforcement in Amy's case is straight up asked, is there any connection between this case here in Minnesota, the Jacob Wetterling case that just happened 4 or 5 days ago, and then Amy Mihaljevic? They're almost the same age. And I've heard people's comments on at a certain age, gender doesn't matter to these creeps, and I get that, but I think from what I've seen and experienced as far as true crime goes and cases that we've covered and cases that I've looked into, these two were older enough that I think gender did matter. And I think law enforcement is not only aware of that, but they were vocal about that at the time, because they straight up said, well, you do have to consider the fact that the victims here are male, one is male and one is female. Yes, they're about the same age, but one haunting thing that the investigator said in that same article, he says, but if you look at the two of them, they could be brother and sister. And it's weird how in some strange, bizarre, scary, creepy way, they're kind of linked in some way forever, 30 years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys believe that the phone calls are connected?
I debate that. I think maybe a couple of them may be connected. I don't know if, I think there was a report of 8 phone calls, but I mean, when I spoke with Chief Spetzel, I think he's confirmed maybe 2 were connected. So that leaves 6 out there that, I don't know. I mean, it's the 80s and even today, people like to be a part of the story. So I'm not sure if I can take everything with as it is. I tend to take that with a grain of salt. How about you, Nick?
Well, I think that this is something that we won't know for certain until the case is solved, because you have to factor in a few things into the equation. One, how targeted was Amy specifically? If she was the target all along, then if there were any phone calls connected to this was just somebody trying out and practicing to, hone their craft a bit before they go to their target. So those are really calls that they're connected, but they don't serve the same purpose for our perpetrator. Now, I'm with you, Bill. There's been, over the years, I've heard 8, 9, numbers as high as 12. If you go back to the initial investigation in 89 and 90, what they were saying at that time was that there was probably 2 that they seemed to think were actually, in fact, connected. My guess all along with that was that there must have been some verbiage in those conversations that were similar enough to the unknown. We got to keep that in mind. We don't know the exact conversation that went down between Amy and this guy, but there must have been something in there enough for police to say on the record, we think that these two could be possibly connected. Now, as far as I could trace that back, it actually appears that the 2 that they think are most likely connected to Amy's case were calls that took place in March and April. Amy's not getting these calls. We have no reason to believe that she got these calls until a day or days or a week before she was actually abducted, which was late October. That's a pretty big window. Mm-hmm. So if in fact they are connected and they're not the same neighborhood, they're not the same city, they're not the same town, we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Why is that window so big? If they are in fact connected, what's going on between April and October that prevents this guy from continuing to do this? Did he get scared? Or
maybe he did continue and they just weren't reported.
Correct. And that's the thing that I think Bill points out very well. This was the 80s. Crank calls were a thing. They weren't that terribly uncommon. And with Amy's case, the other thing too is maybe they didn't hit their mark. Maybe Big Brother was home and picked up the phone. Maybe, that stuff we will never know. But I actually, the more and more that I look at this case, the more that I think that Amy she was targeted. I just don't know how sometimes these perverts will cast a wide net. We don't know how many he was going after or what, but I do think she was targeted, and I'm with the captain. I think that if these two were connected, there was probably other calls that we just don't know about. That's a long answer to say, I don't know, Bill.
Yeah, my gut feeling is actually less, that maybe there's not even one other call connected, that they might have, like you said, a singular call that they go, well, this is a possibility, but not 100%, connection there. And I that's a gut feeling, but it's also based off of Amy's look, her age, her attitude, things that she was involved in. I don't think she was the typical girl next door or even the quote unquote all-American girl. So I think that her look and her demeanor were that did something to this individual to make him want to target her.
Well, I would say this about Amy, and this kind of goes back to Nick's discussion about gender not mattering at a certain age. Amy was an older 10-year-old. She wasn't, girls develop before boys. That's as any male knows. You go to a junior high dance, the girl's taller than you are. Or at least it was for me. I don't know. But anyway,
I had a beard in 6th grade. So
why does that not surprise me? I'm just not surprised.
It was a little strange, but we got through it.
He had been held back 4 or 5 years.
Maybe 6. I couldn't count at the time, so I'm not for sure.
All making sense now.
Yeah.
All makes sense. Yes, I think Amy was targeted. I think that with her look, like the captain said, with her look, and if you're let's say you're basing it off of the picture that they use on the school poster, or not the school poster, but the missing poster. That picture, Renner always talks about how she hated that picture because in all reality, she was more of like a tomboy, and
right.
She was more into being at the farm, because she rode horses and that type of stuff, opposed to playing Barbies or whatever. Not to say that she didn't, just wasn't necessarily number one on her list. So I definitely think that the appeal, it had to.
But here's the thing, though, is when you think of your buddies going on dates, right? And I know that's a whole different thing, but most people have types. So why wouldn't a pedophile have a type? It's just, and that's where my argument with a lot of these missing.
They do 100%. Yeah.
Right.
And whoever did this to Amy did, and she unfortunately fit his type.
Right. And I think, and that to me matters, because I do think there are molesters and pedophiles out there that they'll just take whatever they can get. Just like you have a friend that will just go on any date he can go on, because that's where he's placed his self-esteem, his confidence, or whatever. And I
unfortunately all know somebody like that.
Yeah. And I thought a lot about that with like Brian Schaefer's case. If it was a possible abduction, that if there are people out there going after a 10-year-old girl, going after a 15-year-old girl, going after a 20-year-old girl, having types of victims, then why isn't there somebody out there that's going, hey, I'm looking for a mid-20-year-old good-looking man, and that's my victim type, But I think because she was a tomboy, I think that's where, to me, that's the proof that it was more targeted. That was always one of my things growing up. I played sports. So who was I around? The guys that played sports with me. And when we're at this soccer tournament, guess who we're hanging out with? The girls team. And because there were athletes, a lot of them were more tomboyish. So that's always been a type of mine. So the sporty type. But I have a lot of friends that are not into that at all. They don't get it. Well, why would you want a girl that was good at sports? Like, how is that attractive to you? So I think because of that, I just think it puts a smaller frame on what type of individual we're looking for.
But see, I think therein lies something that I've said from Jump Street all along. I've always said, if you could figure out how this individual knows Amy and she does not know him, that's your link to finding this killer. It always has been, and in my opinion, it always will. And we're talking about victimology here. And if this pedo has a type, well, what type is it? Because with Amy, look, I've been looking at this thing a long time. Amy could fall into 3 different types depending on what day of the week it is.
Right.
She was very often, yes, a tomboy. In the videos that we see, her father says that she was. That is no mystery. That is a truth. However, her school pictures, she looks like the cute, done-up girl that the boys would want to talk to. A completely different type. And then we also have neighborhood friends, parents of close friends of hers, that she was a ragamuffin. She was someone that was a child that was maybe not taken care of as good as she could have been because Margaret had her issues. She was, and sometimes that's a type for a lot of these predators as well. I mean, David Elliott Penton, he killed multiple little girls that were 5, 6, 7 years old. You know who he targeted? The ones that he thought were throwaways, the ones that he thought nobody would miss, the ones that lived in poverty, the ones that he thought, you know what, the police won't care about them, or mom's got a drug problem, so they'll start looking at the family before they look at the strange guy that creeped up next to this kid in the van that I've been following around for a week. So there are different types, and I think that Amy's victimology is difficult, one, because of her age. And Bill, you're absolutely right. She does appear to be older. She, in a lot of the pictures and videos leading up to her abduction, she actually appears to me to be like 12 and a half years old. So it goes back to victimology. Victimology is so important in finding and really shrinking the pool of people, the suspect pool that you're going to choose from. So,
yeah, and I'd say the ragamuffin thing, though, is also indicative of a tomboy. Was it that she wasn't kempt because of her parents, or was she not kempt because when they tried to keep her that way, it was a disaster? It's like, I have nephews that will go outside in their nicest clothes and come back covered in mud. Eventually, you don't put them in their nicest clothes. Oh, you're going to go outside and play? Throw on this.
Yeah, just to give Amy's family a little bit of there was that was one thing that they were not pleased about was the description of her being a ragamuffin, which any family would, it's got a negative connotation to it in some ways. Some people take it as, oh, she wasn't taken care of. But like the captain said, it's more like, no, she probably just put on whatever the hell she wanted to put on and went and did her own thing. It wasn't so much of a, she's not being taken care of. I mean, her dad had a good job. Her mom had a good job. I mean, they weren't, trust me, the neighborhood they lived in was far from impoverished. And, it's one of those things, like with Margaret having known issues. This is not a shocker. We're not like speaking out of school. She drank, she had addiction issues with alcohol. And with that being said, do you feel like, and I think Renner's brought this up, do you feel like that this person could have been in her circle of friends, or within her maybe not circle of friends, but within the people that she hung out with?
Well, it's pretty, I mean, you guys know the case better than me, but it's pretty common knowledge that a lot of people believe that she was taken from the shopping plaza. And then there's a debate on how long she was alive afterwards. But they believe that she was taken away from that area. And like you were saying, how she has a little bit of an older demeanor. I almost feel like this individual had to know her enough to know little quirks about her. But I think their idea was that they're going to have some kind of real relationship with her. And then at some point the perpetrator's going, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. This is not going to end well for me, her, or anybody. And I believe she was murdered because of that. Because they realized they made a mistake, and they can't just drive her back home and drop her off. That whether she knew the individual or he just felt like the time they spent together, she knew her enough at that point, knew them enough at that point. And, I think there's a lot of people, again, that argue back and forth on if this was the first time for this individual or multiple times, or if they tried to have other victims later. And maybe it's just a gut feeling, but I think this was such a mistake that they made, that's why the murder happened. And that's probably why there was never another one connected to her case. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of clarify what I was talking about before, because I don't think that I hit it home all the way. But the ragamuffin not cared for, that the stuff that I was saying, look, there's no doubt about it. She came from a good family, came from a good neighborhood, lived in a great area, wonderful house, went to a good school. Nobody questions that. And Mark Mihaljevic is a hell of a guy, and the Mihaljevic family has been through hell. What I'm trying to point out is what is the perception of the abductor. It doesn't have to be the actual reality of what's going on. But when we have other people who have referred to her as a ragamuffin, you referenced somebody, Bill, but also we have Jeannie Sabo and others. And I think that was meant to be. I'm not going to go too far down a weird rabbit hole here, but I think that was meant to be a term of endearment. But we also know what the definition of that word actually is. And so what I'm pointing out here is if this guy was keeping watch on a neighborhood or looking for a victim, because he was looking for a victim. That's one thing we know without knowing who he is or his modus operandi. We know that for a fact.
Whether it was a relationship or whatever.
Right. And what I'm pointing out here is it wouldn't take much for someone to think that maybe she falls into this category of somebody that's vulnerable, and that maybe he's looking for somebody that's vulnerable. Right. It wouldn't take much to notice that a couple days a week, she's riding her bike by herself down to Holly Hills. Oh, there's no parent around. Oh, every time I see her, she's in sweatpants off by herself. You know what I mean? It's the perception of the abductor that she could fall into his quote unquote type victimology that he's looking for. But again, it not be the full reality. And you asked if I think that it's somebody that she knew. No, I've always said this, that I think that the main perpetrator, I want to underline that word real quick without staying on it too long. The main perpetrator in this whole ordeal, she did not know who he was. That doesn't mean that the Mihaljevic family doesn't know him. It doesn't mean that someone in her larger circle does not know this guy. I don't think she knew him. I think Amy was a very intelligent girl. There's plenty of evidence to back that up. And what she was told on the phone, as far as we know, she did not know who this guy was. She was smart enough that if she would have recognized him that day when he met her, she would have went, this is not on the up and up. There's something wrong here. And we wouldn't be sitting here talking about the death and murder of Amy Mihaljevic 31 years later.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. I think that both of you guys are right in the sense that if things would have gone differently, if she wouldn't have put up a fight, most likely. I mean, we know that we're pretty sure she did. She was not going to back down, but to say that, I mean, man, if things could have gone differently, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. It's a crazy thought. And I know this is a controversial, and I don't even know if anybody's even talked about this, and I know I've talked to Chief Spetzel and he's given me specifics on the phone call and stuff like that. And earlier we talked about the phone calls being connected. What if the phone call didn't even happen? And this is like, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like that's the only narrative that we've been given since the beginning. And
true, but we've been, that information comes from more than one source.
Comes from two sources.
Correct. And two people that she told.
Right. And
to me, it seems like too much of a coincidence.
I agree. I'm posing a question. I'm not necessarily saying that it is. At all. I just think that when you follow one narrative for 31 years and you haven't seen any results from that particular course, you have to at least question for a second whether or not there's something amiss. And it's not to say that there wasn't a phone call or there wasn't this, that, but like, we know the game of telephone, things get misconstrued by the second person, third person, whomever, it's a different story by the end. And I'm just bringing it up as a question because of the fact that that's the only story we've ever been given.
We were actually somewhat talking about this while we were recording this week, because I've been talking to a lot of people involved in different cases, and you have this narrative, especially like in Amy's case, it's 31 years. So there's all these things that we now view as factual. And most of that comes from published items. And when I mean published items, through podcasting, Bill, that normally when you go to post your new episode, it normally says publish the new episode. And so whether it's through books, whether it's through TV shows, whether it's through podcast, sometimes we are rewriting the narrative of some of these cases. And that makes it harder to solve, because go back to the Golden State Killer case. When my friend showed me that a year and a half before the cops arrested this individual, that there was a guy on the message board going, hey, by the way, I've been looking into my family's history, and my dad used to break into houses, and he used to have this guy that would help him out sometimes. And here's a picture of the guy. And then on the message board, it's all these so-called experts of the case going, you don't know anything about the case. You're not an expert. You're stupid. What's the guy's name? Oh, well, the guy gave me a pot, or gave my dad a pot at one point, had his last name. After being called an idiot, after people telling him, go read this book and research the case, the guy goes, here's his name. And then a year and a half later, after DNA tests are done, the guy's arrested and charged as a Golden State Killer. But he was on a forum a year and a half earlier looking for some answers. And I think that's where we're at with a lot of these cases. Amy Mihaljevic, Mara Murray, Brian Schaefer, that podcasters, authors, documentarians, they're rewriting the narrative of what is factual. And then what's crazy to me, just this last week, I'm interviewing the boyfriend of a missing girl. He's going over some of the stuff that happened in in the initial search, and he tells me a couple pieces of information that I never heard before, and then don't really believe him. Can you confirm this? Oh yeah, this guy was with me. This guy was with me. So I talked to them. Now I got 3 people telling me the same story. I didn't even ask him a question. I just said, can you go over the story? Can you tell me from your... They tell me the same information. I go to an author that wrote about the case. He's telling me, no, that's a lie. That's not true. You can't believe him. Go to all these other individuals that have studied the case. Oh, he must be lying. So you're going to tell me that you wrote a book about the case, so you now know more than 3 individuals that were actually in her room? You see what I'm saying? Like, or were actually there at the search? We need to go back with a lot of these cases and try not to rewrite the history of it. Perfect example, like in the Mara Murray case. We have an eyewitness at the crash scene, one of the neighbors, that said they saw a man possibly smoking in the passenger seat. And later on, years later, the internet determines that that wasn't a cigarette, that it was possibly a light from a cell phone. Possibly a light from a cell phone. And now people are going back and looking into that case going, wait a second. We can't just turn this eyewitness's statements into whatever the hell we want it to be. And every time I've brought up that case to detectives, to police officers, they always tell me the most important thing in that case is the crash, what happened within the next 30 minutes or so. And when I go over the eyewitness that saw the smoker, they go, oh, that's important. And then I say to them, well, we think it might have been a cell phone. They go, we don't care what you think it is. What did the eyewitness tell you? And maybe the eyewitness was wrong, but you can't rewrite the narrative. And I think we've done that a lot in cases because, for example, the Amy case becomes more interesting because she got a phone call, because she got duped. Okay, now if that phone call was real and that phone call happened another 12 times, oh shit, that's fascinating. Same way with like the Brian Schaefer case. We have no footage of him leaving the bar. Right there, you're hooked. Guy walks into a bar. We have no footage of him leaving. He's never been seen again. And we can't just rewrite the narrative that we want it to be. And I think a lot of times, even like in a case like this, and I think maybe it's a Hollywood thing too as well. We think that there's some genius Hannibal Lecter out there that's creating murders like Seven, going through the 7 deadly sins or whatever.
I just watched that again the other day. Great movie.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie, but that's normally not
it's a movie.
Yeah, normally it's not reality. Chances are this guy was very lonely. He felt this weird connection. He built a relationship between her and him in his head that didn't exist in real life. And he then got his opportunity. And I wouldn't even say I would say he's average or below average IQ. And yeah, I think people think that there's some like mastermind out there. And after he was able to kill Amy, that he was going to then keep repeating it. Well, if he was a mastermind, there wouldn't be 12 calls with no captures. There would have been 10 calls and 8 captures or whatever. But I think because we can't connect her case to anybody else's case, I think that proves it was a one-off. Then that goes to, well, why would it be a one killing for this individual? I went on a complete crazy rant. Sorry about that. But it's just, I've just been noticing this a lot as we cover cases.
It's a great point. It really is. I mean, and what you said about the genius Hannibal Lecter types, and I mean, look at Joseph D'Angelo or whatever the Golden State Killer's name is. You look at that guy, and he's far from Hannibal Lecter, intellectually, and sure, he was just more lucky, I think, than anything. And in a lot of cases, I mean, he obviously was smart enough to get away with it, but I do believe that this is most likely a one-off. But
I also think because his plan got derailed, and I think that's why there was a murder, that we have to view this individual as somebody with a background that didn't do a lot of planning with their own life. And that would go back to like maybe where he lives. That I think that's also indicative of how much financial means he had, because this person was not a planner. Like, yeah, he made a phone call and got her to go to the shopping plaza, but I don't think he had much of a plan after that. I think this individual was shocked that even worked. And since he didn't have much of a plan, I even think as far as like dumping the body, why wouldn't you you're talking about an area that's pretty wide open. You could have just went a little bit further and dug a ditch, and more likely that she wouldn't have been found. So I think there's a lot of missteps planning wise, and I think then that goes into the psychology of the individual. Not, a little below average IQ, doesn't plan a lot with their life, probably doesn't have a lot of possessions, probably doesn't have a lot of money in the bank, probably isn't that far along in any type of career, because they're not one to plan.
yeah, Nick, what's your feelings on that?
Look, I mean, obviously we clearly don't know the personality of this individual. I see somebody who took a lot of efforts and planned a lot of things, and actually, whether it was luck or intelligence, or both, I see that there in the abduction of this kid. And I think that
Well, hold on, and I'm not trying to sass you or anything, but what are the things that he planned out? The phone call and the meetup, and then taking her away from that location?
yes.
But it wasn't a plan not to be seen.
Yes, it was. So that I think is important to the makeup of this individual. The phone call shows to me someone a little more patient and maybe even a little more practiced, even if it's just thought and in planning, because you grab a kid at random on the side of the road, there's very often witnesses. And what we have, yes, of course, we do have witnesses in this exact story, but we have two very different kinds of witnesses. And when you compare the two, when you see a screaming kid get pulled into a car, that's a completely different witness than someone telling you a couple days later, oh, I saw this man who was in his 30 to 35 years of age. He walked up to Amy and the two walked away together. I think there's little nuances in here to me. And yes, I'm filling in a lot of blanks. I'm not going to lie about that. I'm filling in a lot of blanks that we simply do not know the answers to. And yes, I'm making probably some leaps along the way too. So take this with a grain of salt, but everything that I see here, and the blanks that I'm choosing the way to fill them in, I see someone who has planned this out. We don't have the problem, and this is something that the chief of police was screaming from the hilltop immediately, was we do not have a description of a vehicle. He's like, I would trade everything in this case for a description of a vehicle. I think that shows some level of criminal sophistication here. I think that very likely, and I'm not going to say that Dean Runkle did this, but, and I don't, he's certainly on my list of suspects, but I think that James and others have something there with the thought that this guy very likely parked behind the plaza. He didn't park in the parking lot that is so visible from every storefront in that plaza. We don't have anybody saying, oh, I saw the two of them leave in this vehicle, this, whatever it may be. I think that shows a level of criminal sophistication. The other thing too, that there's that weird comment that's in the papers and always has been. And who knows, again, Captain's right. Who knows if somebody's changed the narrative? I don't know. But this was from the beginning where a witness said, I saw him place his hand on her back and he led her away. Think about that action and what that requires. Why would you do that? Everything is a choice, whether it's he did something subconsciously or he did it well and with planned thought. Putting your hand on the back of a child and quietly walking them away is so much better than going, you see that blue truck over there? That's mine. Look, that's where we're heading. You have to instruct this child where to go with you. You know, if we
and it's a very gentle gesture.
Right.
You're not putting your hand on her shoulder. You're not grabbing her arm. You're not even trying to hold her hand.
We don't have anybody saying that I saw them leave in this vehicle. We don't have a vehicle description. And then to take that a step further, we don't have anybody going, oh, he motioned toward a vehicle. We saw them walking toward this vehicle because there wasn't a ton.
Oh, hold on. Right. But what I'm saying is I agree with you on that. But what I'm saying is you could plan the call. You can plan the place to meet. You could plan, this is where I'll park and I'll take her to my vehicle. I don't think there was a lot thought out after that.
Well, we have the phone call to Margaret, which I think is another strategic thing that was done. We know that there's a third location. You know, this is one of those crimes where we have multiple crime scenes when you really break it down. We have her home where the phone calls took place. We have the shopping mall, the shopping plaza where she was abducted from. We have the perpetrator's vehicle. Right. We know that there's a vehicle involved because he transported her alive, dead, what have you. But there's a third place. I have a hard time believing that she was killed in a vehicle and then just dumped on the side of the road in Ashland County. And so right. There's another crime scene that we are unaware of. So again, it's yes, you're on the surface, you're absolutely right. I'm not disagreeing with you, but what I'm saying is when you have to really break it down and start going, okay, well, yeah, not only did he do the phone calls, but there's things inside the phone calls that are smart too. She told people about the phone calls. She doesn't name the person. Right. Well, that's pretty clever. He gained her trust by telling her things about her and her life. That's pretty intelligent. And I'm not trying to give this despicable person any type of credit. I'm just saying that it's a combination of he got some things right and he probably got lucky on a few things too. But I see somebody that was able to basically undetected abduct a pretty smart child in broad daylight in a very safe area. And he took precautions to buy some time afterward. Phone call to Margaret and I see what you're saying. Well, I'm not saying this guy's a moron. The murder doesn't seem to be thought out, nor does the dumping of the body, but those things are all secondary because neither of those, we're all saying that we don't think that was the intention. If that's not right. The intention, there's no way of planning for something that you don't foresee happening.
Right. But here's my analogy. Guy goes to school, honor roll, A, B, C student. You should go to college. Well, I don't know what I want to do with my life, so I'll go to college. Halfway through college, what's your major? I don't know. I'm just here taking classes. At some point, well, you got a bunch of credits that lead you to be an English teacher, let's say. Okay, well, I'll do that. Get done with school. Can't get a job as a teacher, so then you get a job as something else. That's what I'm saying about as far as the sophistication that I think the person had. I think they had this idea that I'm going to make this call. I'm going to try to meet her here. I'm going to, park in the back or whatever. But I think if there was a plan, there was a broad plan, but at some point it went off the rails. And there was I think if there was a higher level of sophistication, there would have been, well, if this happens, then here's my options. If this happens, here's my options. And I just don't think this person had all that stuff planned out, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it does. It makes sense. I hear both sides of the coin on you guys' perspectives. A little bit about the plaza. It's like a U-shaped plaza. There's actually a number of places this individual could have parked that would have been outside of the view of the general public. I mean, you could park right behind any of the stores. I mean, one of the grocery stores is the closest thing, and it's just the back of the grocery store. So, there was a bank on the one side that wasn't really occupied by anybody other than an ATM. I don't even know if the ATM was there at the time, but I can assure you that there were plenty of places that this individual could have led her out of the public sight. But the one thing that is interesting about that is we don't have any description of them going around the corner. All we have is that last bit of information about him putting his hand on her back and leading her, but nobody says where, or this was the last time, again, the witnesses were kids. So I don't think they kept their eyes on them, but
right. But here's my problem with the level of sophistication is when, great point. Well, he didn't obviously park where his vehicle was likely to be seen, but he is leading her to a place that he's going to be seen.
I think he's in disguise, to be 100% honest with you. I mean, look at the sketch. It just looks like a wig and glasses.
Comb forward and glasses.
Yeah, and I just feel like,
because I think the level of sophistication would come in. Okay, I can convince you that we're going to go to this plaza. Well, 15-20 minutes after school's let out, it's a desert. Why wouldn't you just go, I'll meet you at your school right after, or I'll meet you around the corner from the school.
Teachers, parents.
Well, I get the teachers, and also if somebody's sitting there waiting and they're by themselves, the teacher's going to go, Amy, who are you waiting for? Oh, this guy is supposed to come pick me up. But I'm just saying that there's all these other places that you could have said, well, meet me here so then we can go to the plaza.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this week's episode. But stay tuned for part 2 next week with Nic and the Captain of True Crime Garage. Thank you so much to Nic and the Captain for joining me on this very special episode of Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic. October 27th marks the 31st anniversary of Amy's abduction from the Bay Village Plaza, and her case remains unsolved to this day. If you guys have any information in regards to the death of Amy Renee Mihaljevic, I implore you to contact the Bay Village Police Department at 440-871-1234, or you can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. And again, if you have any information and want to stay anonymous, you can also submit a tip via Crime Stoppers. If you do enjoy the podcasts that I do produce, you can help support the show by donating via PayPal with my username BillHuffman123@yahoo.com, or via Venmo with my username Bill-Huffman-3, and that will help keep these shows on the air. So again, any contribution does help, and if you want to support the show via a review, that would be great too, because that helps keep the cases that I cover in the spotlight. So, again, thank you so much again for tuning in to this week's very special episode of Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic. This is part 1 of my conversation with Nic and the Captain. Part 2 will be dropping next week. So again, as always, stay safe and be healthy.
See, New Yorker is getting answers on a new attempt to bring this family some justice.
What makes Amy's case so unique is the manner in which she was abducted. This wasn't some random act of opportunity.
In the home of Bill Huffman is a makeshift studio, the walls covered with photos and newspaper clippings of a mystery that's yet to be solved.
And welcome to episode 1 of the Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic podcast.
The investigative journalist was just 10 years old in 1989 when the crime happened, the same age as Amy Mihaljevic. Her unsolved kidnapping and murder has haunted him for years.
It just was one of those cases that just stuck with me.
So he started a podcast. For the last several months, he's been interviewing investigators and those involved with Amy's case, hoping to find new clues and get answers. He tells me one of his most difficult conversations was with Amy's father, Mark.
It's one thing to see a missing poster, and it's another thing to meet the father of the daughter.
Tell us, why do you think this story resonates with people all over the world?
Well, I just think Amy's case is so unique, and basically it boils down to the way that she was abducted. Most abductions aren't part of a ruse. Amy was called at home. You know, potentially this person knew that she was home alone.
There are 10 episodes, and every Friday Huffman will release one up until the anniversary of the day Amy went missing, October 27th.
Any little bit of extra information, any tips that come in that could be generated from this podcast, then the podcast has served its purpose.
Getting answers in Bay Village.
Let the killer know that this community will never forget what he did that day, and remind him that we will one day find out who killed Amy Mihaljevic.
See a New Yorker, Cleveland 19 News.
Well, the podcast is available on all apps, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you have any tips about Amy Mihaljevic's murder, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-225-5324.
3 a.m., the comedy horror podcast that holds weekly gatherings around the campfire. Let me tell you what you're going to get. You're going to hear stories about demonic possessions, prison stabbings, skinwalkers, glitches in the Matrix, cult leaders, missing 411, night marchers, Operation Paperclip, Mesopotamian devil worship, and so many monsters it'll give Kanye West a runaway for his money. Pop and meme culture also aren't off topic. A camp where laughs and scares are constantly competing for first place. We're just a group of friends, trying to bust each other's balls, find the best stories, and expand the circle in the process. 3 a.m., the comedy horror podcast not for the faint or fragile of heart. Let's go.
The crime was so brutal it was compared to the Manson murders. Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case, explores what it takes to bring new attention to an unsolved double homicide and turns up new hope for answers. Listen to Mary and Bill, an Ohio cold case from IdeaStream Public Media, wherever you get your podcasts.